Welcome to 0 to 60 Motoring once again. My name is Bill, and today actually I have a very interesting topic. This is the Toyota HiAce. Actually in the street it's normally called as the it's called as the box or even chopper. Now if you have been keen or keeping up with the news, this car has been one of those cars which are leading in accidents, and today I'm going to demystify the myth whether this car is a death trap. Is it the car that has a problem or the driver? So welcome back to 0 to 60 Motoring once again, and remember 0 to 60 Motoring is that channel that is going to guarantee you unbiased car reviews. So if you want to purchase a car, you can literally check our Facebook page or YouTube channel, and then if you miss a review, you can always ring us to ask about that car. So is the chopper or box or a Toyota HiAce a death trap? The Toyota HiAce has actually carved its niche as a tried and tested workhorse, because this chopper, let me use that term, is everywhere in the country, leading when it comes to carrying people or even cargo. So it's a dependable car that let me say you're going to find it anywhere. It needs no introduction, basically. That is the right statement. So this car has actually been labeled as a killer van. Let's start with the power. This car actually runs on the same engine like a Toyota Land Cruiser Prado or a Toyota HiLux. It is a 3000cc turbocharged diesel. We normally call it the 1KD. So it's actually pretty powerful, meaning this car will actually outrun you, especially on long distance. That's why you should not try to keep up with this car if you are having a small doo-doo, something like a Toyota Vitz or even a Honda Fit. So when you are having too much power in this car, that means the driver should also understand this car. So you need to know the braking distance, what the car can do and what it cannot do, because the chassis is different from a Toyota Land Cruiser or a Toyota HiLux. So regardless whether they have the same engine, you cannot drive this car as a Toyota HiLux. So I think there is too much power in this car. Another engine that this car comes with is a 2.5 liter diesel. We normally call it the 2KD, or a 2000cc or 2.7 liter petrol. So of course mostly if you are into business, you are not going to consider the petrol variants because they are extremely thirsty and the return on investment will be on the lower side. Now this car, considering that it runs the same engine as for example this specific one has a 3000cc, considering that it runs the same engine as a Toyota Land Cruiser Prado or a Toyota HiLux, that tells you something. It's extremely powerful. Let me use that term, because when I'm looking at the previous generation of the Toyota HiAce, it was not as powerful as this one. Away from power, there is something we call a safety rating in a car. Of course, most Kenyans don't look at safety ratings when purchasing cars, and that is something you should start looking at. Now, the Toyota HiAce, this boxy shape, has a very, very low safety rating, because when I'm looking at ANCAP safety ratings in Australia, this car has a safety rating of 2.9 out of 5. That is actually on the lower side. The reason is pretty simple. It all boils down to the design of this car. Now, when you're looking at this car versus something like a Toyota HiLux, which it shares an engine with, you realize that this one has a shorter nose while a HiLux has a longer nose. So basically when you're in this car, you are seated on the engine. The nose here is pretty small. So when this car hits a wall, a tree, basically the person seated up front here, they are going to absorb the shock. So the body design of this car is actually something that can be blamed, especially when this car gets into an accident. Now, because most cars out there are normally not legally loaded, now picture when you are 20 passengers in this car with some luggage in the boot, and then the driver is overspeeding. If your physics teacher was one of the best, you should understand that in that case the momentum is very high, and the driver is not going to effectively brake in this car. So in that case, when you are hitting a wall and you are seated on this front here, basically you are going to be the person bearing in, carrying all that shock, because when you're looking at the distance between the end of this car and where you are seated, it's actually pretty minimal. So I'm looking at the design of this car as a disaster. And when you're looking at the subsequent generation, actually the Toyota HiAce, the later version, has a long nose, and that is why you're going to find it has a higher safety rating than this one. Because of the low safety rating, that's why this van, the Toyota HiAce, overseas, it's normally used for cargo, not people. That's why when you're importing a Toyota HiAce, in most cases, you're going to find it with only the front seats and maybe a second row seat. And another point that you may want to ponder about, now when you are like 20 people seated inside here, the driver is overspeeding because the car is powerful. When this car rolls, these body parts are not that strong because this car is made of lightweight materials, of course, to improve on fuel economy. That's another thing that makes this car actually very unsafe. When you are looking at this car compared to the previous one, that one was actually very strong when I'm looking at the body integrity. This one, even in a slight roll, as long as it was overloaded, it's going to become a death trap in that case. Now, let's look at another elephant in the room. Do the brakes of this car normally lock? That is actually another question I normally get most of the time. So, do the brakes of this car normally lock? Yes and no are correct answers to that question. Yes, they can lock. But I want us to picture it this way. Normally, this car comes from overseas. It has been used there for like 7 or 6 years. But then, the claims of a brake locking, they are not there when it comes to overseas users. That tells you something. Now, when this car comes to the Kenyan market, of course, people try to run some modifications on them. And then they are going to tamper with the braking system of the car. So when you try to engineer something that has already been engineered elsewhere and it's already working, most probably you're going to tamper with it. Now, when you're going to use fake parts when servicing this car's braking system, of course, the brakes are going to fail at some point. And another point, when you're going to tamper with the braking system of this car, with the ground clearance and even with the suspension settings, of course you're going to interfere with sensors. Remember, these modern cars normally work with sensors. Now when the sensor is not working, the car is not going to be safe as it was. Now another thing, when the car is overloaded and the brake has already been interfered with, most probably in case of an emergency, that braking system is not going to work. And in that case, now you can now blame the human element, not the car. Now when you have interfered with the suspension settings here and the height, of course you are going to interfere with the load sensor in this car. And when you interfere with the load sensor, most probably the car is not going, the sensors, because they are inactive, they are not going to send the correct signal when it comes to the braking system of the car. So that is another thing you should also be considering. I'll say it's important or it's prudent understanding a vehicle engineering system before we shift the blame to the car, because this car normally has served 7 or 6 years overseas without any problems of brake failure, or even let me say brake failure. But then when these cars get here, that's when problems start. It's basically because we are doing a lot of modifications on them and then we are not loading them legally, because when you overload a car, you're going to interfere with the braking distance of the car, and even when the car hits something, you are going to even interfere with the safety capability of the car. So when this car is in, let me say, when it's empty and it hits a pole, the reaction will be different compared when it's overloaded and it hits a pole, because basically in that case when it's overloaded, the momentum is on the higher side. So let's not completely blame the design of this car. Let's also blame the users of the car, because the car has been used elsewhere and it has not failed. So before blaming the car, let's also blame the users of this van. It is a highly capable van. It is tried and tested on our Kenyan roads. It runs on a very powerful engines, of course, but then it has a very low safety rating. Of course, if you drive sensibly, most probably you are going to have a good braking distance. The design of this car, of course, was a disaster, especially on this front. That's why when you're looking at the crumbles on here, between these crumbles on and the person seated here, it's actually very small. That's why when you are hitting a wall, probably when you're seated at these front seats, they are very unsafe in case of an impact. That is a design flaw from the manufacturer. But good thing, in the later generation, Toyota actually brought a new Toyota HiAce, which actually has a very long nose. So in such a case, before the impact, when an impact happens, it will first be absorbed by the chromosomes and the engine before it reaches the occupants. So in that case, Toyota has already sorted the problem. While the design had a problem, if you purchase this car use genuine parts, and you are not interfering with the suspension system of this car, and then you drive it sensibly, that is legal speeds, most probably you are not going to complain. But then because this car runs on powerful engines, and then you are giving people who want to gun it like a sports car, most probably when it hits a pole, it is going to become a death trap. So in this case, I normally say that a vehicle's weakest part is the nut holding the steering wheel. So a vehicle's weakest part is the driver. So we cannot completely blame the car. Let us also blame the drivers. So yes, this car is a death trap if you don't know how to manage it. I think this video will give you a little bit of insights why this car is a killer van, especially when it's being misused. Otherwise, when it comes to the reliability, you know, the 1KD 3000cc engine here, or the 2KD, that is a 2.5 liter, or even the 2TR engine, those engines are actually bulletproof. I normally call them foolproof. They are going to rake in like actually most vans on the roads, these choppers, some of them have a mileage of around 500,000, 600,000 kilometers, and they don't seem like they are going to break a sweat any soon. So the reliability of this car is one of the reasons that many people are going to use it. But then let's also consider the safety ratings, and let's use the product in their mind and a manner described by the manufacturer. That way you're going to have a simple life with the Toyota HiAce, and it's not going to be labeled as a killer van. Alright guys, see you on the next one.